Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time.
So let's just jump right in with a big question. When you hear that phrase, how democracies die, what pops into your head? I bet for most of us it's something pretty dramatic, right? Like straight out of a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, exactly. You're probably picturing tanks rolling through the streets, right? Maybe a presidential palace on fire. Some general gets on TV and declares a military takeover. You can think of Chile back in 1973 with Pinochet. That was the classic playbook during the Cold War. It was sudden, it was violent, and everybody knew it was happening. But what if that's just not how it works anymore? What if the biggest threat today looks completely different?
I mean, what if the real breakdown today isn't some loud explosion, but more like a slow, quiet leak? The difference is just huge. The old way was a violent coup. Bam. You knew it happened. This new way, though, it's a slow-motion takeover. It's almost impossible to see day to day. And the craziest part is, it uses the very rules of democracy to hollow it out from the inside. And that right there is a true crisis of perception, because it's happening in plain sight.
And this is the core warning in an incredible book called How Democracies Die. It's by two Harvard political scientists, Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. And what their work does is give us a whole new way to see this subtle modern threat. They've looked at democratic failures all over the world to build this framework for understanding what's going on.
Okay, so how does this whole thing even work? How does this new kind of breakdown happen? Well, it all starts at the ballot box. You get an outsider, maybe a charismatic populist, who taps into all this public anger. They promise to burn down the old, corrupt system. But here's the twist. Once they're in power, they don't just get rid of democracy. No, they're much smarter than that. They use the tools of democracy to take it apart, piece by piece. The authors have this fantastic metaphor to explain it. Just imagine democracy is a big soccer match. An aspiring autocrat, they don't just cancel the game. Instead, they figure out how to rig it so they can never lose. So first, they go after the referees. They pack the courts, they put their own loyal people in charge of law enforcement, the intelligence agencies, you get the idea. Then they start sidelining the other team's best players. Maybe they use a bogus tax audit, or some trumped-up legal charge to go after opposition leaders, or even the media. And finally, once they've done all that, they just rewrite the rulebook itself, changing election laws, maybe even the Constitution, to make sure their advantage is permanent.
And that is what makes this whole process so dangerous, so insidious. The book just nails it with this quote. Elected autocrats maintain a veneer of democracy while eviscerating its substance. So on the surface, everything looks normal. The country still seems like a democracy. You've still got elections, you've got a legislature, you've got newspapers. But the real stuff, the fair competition, the checks and balances, the very soul of the whole system, it's all been scooped out.
So you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't that what constitutions are for, to stop this from happening? And yeah, that's a great question. But what Levitsky and Ziblatt argue is that the written rules, they're just not enough on their own. What really holds a democracy together are what they call the soft guardrails. Think of them as the unwritten rules of the game, the shared understandings of how we're all supposed to behave.
Okay, so the first big one is something called mutual toleration. It sounds complicated, but it's actually a pretty simple and powerful idea. It just means you see your political opponents as legitimate rivals, not as mortal enemies. You can disagree with everything they stand for, you can campaign your heart out against them, but you don't see them as a threat to the country's very existence. You accept that they have a right to be there, a right to compete, and a right to govern if they win.
And the second guardrail is institutional forbearance. This one is all about restraint. It's the idea that just because you can do something legally doesn't mean you should. You don't use the letter of the law to completely destroy its spirit. For instance, think about it. A majority in Congress could, technically, just refuse to confirm any of a president's appointments. They could grind the entire government to a halt. But forbearance is the unwritten rule that says, hey, let's not do that, because everyone understands it would break the whole system for everybody.
So what happens when those guardrails break? When that trust and restraint just disappears? Well, the authors put it pretty bluntly. Institutions become political weapons. They're wielded by whoever's in power against whoever isn't. Suddenly, things like checks and balances aren't about oversight anymore. They're just clubs to beat the other side with. The goal isn't governing for the country, it's just winning, at any cost, even if you have to burn the whole game down to.
And what's the one thing that can absolutely shatter these norms? According to the book, it's extreme polarization. It's when we stop seeing the other side as just people we disagree with and start seeing them as a mortal threat to our entire way of life. When that happens, forget about mutual toleration. In forbearance, that just starts to look like weakness. Politics stops being about debate and becomes a brutal fight for survival. Which brings us right back to where we started. This whole thing is a massive crisis of perception. Because there isn't one big dramatic moment. There's no single event where you can say, okay, that was it. That's the line we just crossed into dictatorship. It just doesn't work that way. And this is the real challenge, isn't it? Every single step in this process seems small. It might even seem perfectly legal with a good justification. And because of that, it's so hard to see the bigger, more dangerous pattern that's forming. Anyone who tries to sound the alarm often just gets called crazy or hysterical. The whole thing happens so slowly that, as the book says, for most people, it's almost imperceptible. And then, one day, you wake up and it's too late. So the book really leaves us with this big, central question to chew on. We put so much of our faith in the written rules, right? In our constitutions, those hard guardrails. But what if the unwritten rules, those soft guardrails of just treating each other with respect and practicing some restraint, what if those are every bit as important for a democracy to survive? And all of these ideas we've been talking about are based on the incredible analysis in How Democracies Die by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. It is a must-read. Now, Crisis and Perception is free to watch and listen to. Supporters on Patreon help fund the research and production that make this work possible. For the full, long-form deep dive into this book and its ideas, follow the link in the description. If you enjoy these explainers, please subscribe and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.